Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. I am joined by a very special Adelaide guest, a magician, although we won't be seeing any of that today. It is Gary Edwards. Welcome, Gary. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks, Ali. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. You might not actually remember this, Gary, but I first met you at a Wake Up conference and you were one of the speakers on stage, and I was captivated by your magician skills when you turned a short piece of string into a long piece of string. And I think it was pretty encapsulating, actually.
Most people remember that trick. Oh, you're the guy with the rope trick. I'm thinking of putting that on my business card, the guy with the rope trick.
I'm the rope guy. Always a good thing to have. So before we get stuck into it today, Gary, can you share a little bit around where you've come from and where you're going?
Well, in the classic phrase, I was born and raised here in Adelaide and haven't moved very far. So I'm one of 6 kids in my family, which is a large family, and my parents had 2 lots of 3 kids. They had 3 kids within 6 years, and they had a 6-year break, then they had another 3. So I kind of grew up with my 2 brothers, and I'm the middle one, and my sister was also at home. My 2 older brothers had kind of moved out from what I could remember. So we grew up here in Adelaide. I went to school. I liked school. I was good at school. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. The 2 things I wanted to do were to be a lawyer or to be a teacher. My eldest brother was a teacher. I didn't particularly want to be a school teacher like he was, but I wasn't sure what else you could do with it. But I just had this idea of teaching. So I became a lawyer and also got into education, got into teaching. So I started doing teaching at TAFE in business law. I worked for 7 years with the Uni SA, teaching law graduates how to do all the very practical things that you need to do to be a lawyer, which is what really got me into the communication side of things, teaching them how to prepare cases for court and present them and how to negotiate and resolve conflict. Which was actually something that I read and thought a lot about as I was growing up. So I've always had an interest in communication and influence. I remember I used to have these arguments with the brother above me, and they weren't messy arguments. They were just sort of clever intellectual type arguments. And I remember him once saying to his girlfriend at the time, "Don't ever argue with Gary, you won't win." And I was very pleased with myself. I thought, oh wow, I thought I was winning those arguments, and it's been confirmed. So I was in education and consulting for a long time, Ali, and then about 20 years ago, I think, I jumped ship and went out on my own and thought, what could possibly go wrong? I had no plan and no money. I still am not sure I have a plan, but I have more money than I did then. And where am I going? I'm kind of happy to just keep doing what I'm doing. I'm really passionate, as you know, about, we're in a similar area in terms of your courageous conversations, and my stuff centers around influential conversations. And so I'm just very passionate about helping people be more successful in business and life by being able to communicate more effectively.
Yeah. Brilliant. And I think there's nothing like having a bit of a sibling rivalry to really hone your debate skills. Is it? I'm one of 4, and certainly can argue much better than my husband, who is an only child. I'm like, we're just having an argument. It's not a fight. It's just a discussion. So I think it is definitely one of those skills that you can learn from an early age that carries you right through into adulthood. So obviously studying for law is a big chunk of time. How did you go, I guess, letting the family know that you were not going to be the lawyer of the family?
Well, it was quite funny because I started, I worked for the Commonwealth Bank for a year before what's now called a gap year. And I just, just to earn a bit of money before you go to uni. And the plan was to go to uni. And at one point during that period of time, and I was earning the grand sum of $90 a week. And I thought that was pretty good. And I remember telling my mum I decided I wasn't going to go to university because I was, having fun earning money. And she put it in her diary. I saw it there one day, Gary drops bombshell. And I went, oh, okay, right. So that clearly was not popular.
And today shall forever be known as the day that Gary dropped the bombshell.
But then I got into law and practiced law for about 10 years, and I just slowly transitioned over into teaching. I did it part-time. And when I became a full-time lecturer at university, I was lecturing and talking to young lawyers. So they had a law degree, and then you had to do a 12-month program and all the very practical skills of being a lawyer. So for my mother, you know, who's 91 and so comes from that era, having a lawyer in the family is a big thing.
Yeah.
And if you can be a lawyer, why would you not want to be a lawyer? Why would you choose to do anything else? And so, you know, in a sense, she was extremely proud of having a lawyer as a son. And we never really talked about it when I stopped doing it. But it was actually just recently, she said to me, something was on the television that made her look at me. And for the very first time in 100 years, she said something like, do you ever regret it? Or do you ever, you know? And I went, oh my God, we're having the chat. We're having the talk. And I said, no. I said, you know, my law degree has got me to where I am. It's quite frankly, a law degree is the gift that keeps on giving, because I have found that if you've got one, people think you know a whole lot of stuff that you don't actually know. It's kind of this, you know, bit of a shiny object. And I just said to her, you know, what I do now is highly regarded, and I'm kind of known for the stuff that I do, and I'm very happy with it. And so she said, oh, well, that's good. You know, like most mothers, as long as you're happy doing what you're doing, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I wonder if it was the anniversary of the Gary Drops bombshell.
That's
Perhaps.
right. She's keeping that to herself. It was only, you know, 40 years later or something.
Oh, we hold on to these things, us mums, for later on down the track when we can strike. So now you work with organizations, with leaders, with teams around influence. And I think this is really topical at the moment, because we need to be more influential now than we ever have before, particularly that transition for leaders. You know, it used to be if you held the position of leadership, it was very much a do as I say, get on with it. And now the times are changing, and I think it's refreshing, but I also think it's very much an unknown place for a number of leaders, particularly those that are new or perhaps haven't had experience of having a great leader. So can you explain a little bit around what your thoughts are around influence and why we need it?
Yeah, very much so. And as you say, the times these days, the COVID times that we're in, you know, everything's very uncertain. That's probably the greatest, you know, phrase we've ever used. We keep talking about things being uncertain. And, you know, from a neurological point of view, a psychological point of view, our brains really don't like uncertainty. We really struggle with it. And we really struggle with the idea that we're not in control of things. So I think what we've seen is business has gone in two directions, and sometimes both directions at the same time. One is we've sort of narrowed down. I need to survive. I need to sell stuff. I can't be nice to people. I need to focus. And I need to be more influential because I need to be able to hit the goals and achieve my goals and so on. And so there's been a narrowing down, which is a bit of a you know, survival mechanism. But there's also been a bit of an opening up in the sense of, wow, if things are so uncertain, maybe there are great possibilities out there. And certainly with our staff, you know, and I've seen this on organizations. Some organizations are kind of taking the approach of, right, I need to drive my staff in this direction because that's the only way we survive. And others have gone, you know, and staff have also said, hey, look, I want to be treated differently. I'm not happy with the way we've done things in the past. And things have sort of opened up a bit. And one of the things about being a younger leader, of course, is you're trying to get a handle on it. You're trying to work out what it means to be a leader. Does it mean kind of being directive and persuasive, or can you just hold on to that uncertainty, and can you work with people and help them to help you be a leader? So I think, you know, and I'm happy that I'm glad to be able to say that I think I can help people in both of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely you can. And you've hit the nail on the head there. I think what worked in the past definitely doesn't work now. And for young leaders, it's even more tricky on how do you navigate it. Not only are you new to the leadership space, but perhaps you're trying to be influential to lead this, you know, multi-generational team matrix that we have these days as well, where, you know, now more than ever it's four generations, are they saying, that a team consists of, which if we think about the experiences of all of those individuals, you need to have a lot of tools up your sleeve to be able to communicate with influence to get the buy-in. And we're not face to face. You know, there's so many factors. So when we're talking about influence, what are some of the easy wins that leaders can start implementing to be more influential?
Yeah, I think the key to this, I'm very much influenced myself by a man called Alan Weiss, who's an American consultant.
Yeah.
And Alan's a real character. He's a real New York, rough around the edges, kind of tough talking kind of guy. And sometimes people look at that and they go, gee, he's a bit obnoxious or a bit rough. But that just hides, if you don't look beyond that, you won't learn from what he's got to say. And he is just a genius at influencing people and building relationships. And the key phrase that he uses, which is really the focus of my business, he always says, the conversation controls the relationship and the relationship controls the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, I just boil everything down to that, because as you say, across generations, across levels of generations, and also sideways across cultures within organizations, it's the relationships that you have. And I know, we've talked about this forever, about relationships, but it's the relationships that you have and the conversation that creates that relationship. And, people don't complain about the CEO at the top of the organization. They complain about their manager. They complain about the person who has the most effect or impact on them. So it's really key, I think, more than ever before. And I've mentioned this to you a little while back, that to me, communication and influence is, I think Einstein said we use about 10% of our brain. I actually think we use about 10% of our communication and influence skills. And I've been in situations where I've had to use communication and influence skills at a higher level, appearing in court. I've worked with police hostage negotiators. I've seen that at work. I've presented information. I've been on large stages presenting to people. And you've got to take your communication and influence to a far different level. And one analogy I like to use is that I tend to think of our ability to influence people. It's a bit like owning a Formula One car and only driving it to the shop on the weekends. We're just not using the capacity that we've got. And that capacity is the ability to not, as I say, not just push people in a particular direction, but to build those relationships, knowing and trusting that will lead to the right result. And that word trust is absolutely essential. That's why the conversation builds the relationship, which builds the business. Trust me, I'm a lawyer, right? So who better and a magician? Who better to talk about trust than a lawyer and a magician, right? And it's
sleight of hand and sleight of word.
That's exactly. I mean, you mentioned before. I mean, I've been a magician. I started doing magic when I was 7 years old. Yeah. And it just was this theme through my life. And when you're a kid and you can do magic and fool people and get adults to believe things that aren't true, it kind of messes with your brain, but also gives you a lot of insights into what it means to influence people, what it means to build trust. And I use magic as part of my presentation because it's a metaphor for communication, but also there are real psychological insights into how magic works and why it works. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, and quite literally, the magic words, it very much is that. I remember being once as a lawyer going down to court, and in court you have judges, and me and the other lawyer, we went to appear before a judge, not for a trial, but for what's called a directions hearing. In other words, you've got a case coming up and they need to sort out who's doing what and how many witnesses you're going to have and all that kind of thing. And so you go there and you end up, the judge makes an order for what things are going to happen. And the phrase that the judge used, he's looking at us, he's saying, what have you agreed on? What do you want me to write down? Okay, what do you want me to write down for this order? But the phrase he used is, what form of words do you want me to use? What form of words? And it is literally a magic spell. It's like the old, if you say open sesame, the right words in the right way, the thing opens. Yeah. And he was saying, if you get the right words in the right order, then this order will operate to have this effect. And I just sat there going, this is like a magic trick. This is exactly the same thing. It's saying the right words in the right way.
Yeah. Interestingly, just on that, the right words in the right way, when we're thinking about recruitment and HR, I think a lot of that now is automated and purely on how do we fit in the right words in the right way to be able to get to that next stage. So I think language is becoming more and more influential, more and more important of how we are communicating to those around us. So when we're thinking about some of these communication things, and how do we be more influential, and how do we do this as leaders? You know that I'm a big believer in communication, or the fact that we've got a massive lack of understanding of communication. And my belief is that pretty much all of the problems that we have in the workplace could be solved, 98%, I reckon, could be solved with better communication. Something that I often wonder about is that it's very rare that we have formal communication learnings or training. I mean, there's comms if you're in the media marketing side of things. If you've got comms, air quotes, going out to your customers or your clients or whatever is happening on the public face. But in terms of interrelational communication skills, it's not something that we're really taught at school. It's not something that we're really taught at work, and often it's not something that we learn on the job because there's not great role models. What do you think? Is there an antidote for this? Is it around understanding the importance of communication, or is it going to be something that is going to be a continual barrier for people to get along and get impact at work?
I think the big antidote, Ali, is that people need to engage you and me more often to teach them how to do it. But you're quite right. And I always say to people, people introduce themselves and they tell you what their job is and what their title is. And I then say to them, you've all told me what you do, what your job title is, but 70% of our, whatever your job title is, 70% of our work is, for most people, 70% of your time is spent communicating.
Yeah.
So regardless of what your job title is, we're all actually professional communicators. And every organization has a heap of plans. They've all got strategic plans, HR plans, succession plans, financial plans, marketing plans for everything, except a plan on how we communicate in the workplace and how we communicate with people. And like you said, there are what's typically called strategic communication. How do we get our message out to the world?
Yeah.
But essentially, I spend a lot of my time teaching people how to negotiate with each other, how to resolve, but not only resolve, but also prevent conflict from happening. And I remember when I worked as a lawyer, I would have people come to me with a legal problem, and we'd end up going to court or settling, negotiating a settlement. And I just found myself listening to the story of how they got to this point. And most of the time, and I found this a bit frustrating, but it was also motivating, that most of the time those people, the problem that they had wasn't because they didn't know what the law was, and they didn't know what the law was, but that wasn't the problem. Their problem was that they weren't able to talk to the other person.
Yeah.
They weren't able to take the conversation in the right direction at the right time.
Yeah.
And one thing about being a lawyer is you diagnose people. It's a bit like being a doctor. You ask lots of questions. And so because you're trying to say, okay, you've got this problem or that problem. And so you'd ask lots of questions of the client sitting in front of you, and they'd tell you what happened. And there was one question I would always want to ask them, but you couldn't. There would be a point in the conversation where I just feel like saying, what on earth did you say that for? It's just that moment where you go, oh, you didn't, did you? Oh, really? You did that? Oh, well, there's your problem right there. And you can't say that to them. But what I ended up realizing was these skills, these supposedly advanced skills that I had as a lawyer, I felt they were wasted by the time they got to me. And that's really been a motivator for me to take those skills, those negotiation and influence skills, and to be able to teach them to other people so that they never need lawyers in the first place.
Yes, I love that. And you're so right. Often we say things in a reactive space that gets either blown completely out of proportion, or we escalate it completely out of proportion, and it's purely on lack of understanding or misunderstanding, or you might have said something in a way that was interpreted in another way, which is why, of course, email can be so problematic these days as well, because we're missing out on the vital pieces of the communication. Yeah.
And people, I watch two people. I remember sort of project managing a few things at university, and we had the university on one side and a client organization on the other. And I'm just sitting there watching these two people talk, and they were both speaking English, and therefore they both thought they were speaking the same language. But
that's good.
But I speak fluent university, and I speak fluent, and I won't name the other organization, but it's a fairly unique organization, and I speak fluent that as well.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just listening. It's like watching a game of ping pong, this ball going back, and they think they're talking to each other, and they think they're understanding each other, and they're actually going past each other. And they're both sitting there nodding their head, and I'm thinking, no, this is not going anywhere. You're not getting any agreement here. And I was an interpreter of the English language to English speakers.
Yep.
And I would say, did you realize that when he said this, he actually meant that? And did you realize when she said that, she actually was talking about that? And they go, oh, okay, right. And that's not to be overly critical of those people. It just made me realize, wow, there is just a role here for people to be able to not just, and I think one of the reasons why that was happening is because I think both parties, both sides of it, were sort of coming from a position of power and a position of trying to influence the other person, trying to kind of persuade them, and I'm good and you have to be, they were both trying to sell each other their own version of the world. Yeah. And all they did was sort of hear the other person nod their head, but have no real understanding of what they were talking about.
Yes. And you're talking about opposing businesses. And I think this happens even within a business, whether it's two different teams or even people within the same team. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to listen so that we can say what we think and respond, rather than actually listening to understand and go, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Where are we trying to go? So what are some of your tips for leaders to, is it, my mum used to say, you've got two ears, one mouth, use them proportionately. And now I speak for a living, so the joke's really on her, isn't it? But, what is it? Like, is there some fundamental thing that maybe we even need to be teaching this to kids at school? How do you actually communicate effectively and influentially? But what's something that you see as a stumbling block for leaders?
And just on the thing about teaching this to kids at school, I am absolutely certain that does happen now, certainly more than when I was at school. Kids are taught to speak better and to negotiate with each other. So, it's starting to happen. But some of the stumbling blocks for leaders, I think we tend to have communication is seen to be just talking. And so we communicate every time we open our mouth, right? No, we don't. We say stuff. We don't necessarily communicate. Yep. And communicate is not what we say. It's really what the other person does as a result of what we say.
Yes,
and
that's good.
We've all been in meetings and everyone agrees, everyone knows what has to happen, and we all nod our heads and we all know exactly what has to happen and who has to do what. And we go away and nothing happens, nothing changes. So everyone heard what was said, everyone understood what was said, and everyone agreed. But the true message that came out of that meeting was, this is what we should do, but if you don't do it, it won't matter. We'll have another meeting next week. And so because people sit there, because communication is about words, but it's not really about words, it's about the picture we have in our head. Yeah. And when people sit at a meeting and they say, oh yes, I'll do that, the picture in their head is, oh my God, I've got a heap of work on my desk already. This thing is going down the bottom of the pile. Yep. So when I say I'll do it, well, I'm not going to do it. So, and we know there'll be another meeting next week. And it's been shown that when people get the minutes of a meeting, they read the minutes for two things. One, was I there? And two, was I given a job to do that I need to, find a way to explain why I haven't done it because the meeting is in 5 minutes time. So that is so true. Whoops, was I meant to have anything actioned by the next meeting? The next meeting's in 5 minutes. Can I do it in 5 minutes? Oh no, we'll just pass it over to a next meeting. And there's no, and not that people should be punished for it, whatever, but there are no consequences. There's no end result, and so we just sort of drift along. And we don't like to have those slightly, as you would call them, a courageous or a slightly confronting conversation. We don't like to have that, because I don't want to confront you about your stuff, because you might confront me about my stuff. And therefore we kind of avoid it, and we don't hold each other accountable enough. And so we end up in, we were aiming over there and we ended up over here, and that's close enough. And, tomorrow the sun comes up and everything's okay. And well, okay, let's just get on with it.
Yeah.
And not that we have to be strictly, bashing away at making sure everything's perfect all the time. But in terms of, talking about the barrier, communication is not what comes out of your mouth. And if you want to achieve a result, then the action that people do is what you communicated. And therefore we actually have to work our way backward, because I have a little phrase, which I'm sure you'd be familiar with, which is that belief drives behavior.
Yep.
And so people behave based on what they believe. And if they believe, oh, well, if I don't do this, nothing will change, then that's what they will do. It's like kids, right? You know, I don't have any kids, Ali. I know you've got 4. I don't have any, but that makes me an expert on them because I watch other people. And if you ask one of your boys to clean up their room,
Yeah.
and if they know that if they don't clean it up, mum will come in and clean it up for them, then they won't clean it up.
Yep.
So, you know, the
Guilty.
the belief drives the behavior. And again, having been a magician for many years, I learned very early on how to create beliefs in the minds of other people.
Yeah.
And what I learned was I can get people to believe things as a magician that are untrue, illogical, and impossible.
Yeah.
Right? They believe it. And I look at them and I go, really? You fell for that? Right. Okay. And most of the time we are trying to get people to believe things that are true, logical, and possible.
Yeah.
It's true that I'm good at my job. It's logical that if you use me, I'll make a difference. And it's possible that we could work together.
Yeah.
But why do we have so much trouble selling our services when our services are true, logical, and possible? And I get fascinated by this area of belief. Yeah. And so the real barrier, to go back to your original question, I think, is how do we, what behavior do we want? What belief do we have to create? How do we use the right words at the right time to create that belief? It's a little bit of a, magic words type of situation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And something that I recognize, and you're saying a similar thing, is this idea of if we're going, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're in the meeting. Next step is A, B, C, or X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be. However, my expectation of what a good version of X, Y, and Z is very different to your expectation of what a good version of X, Y, and Z is. But we've never talked about by my understanding and your understanding. And then we come back together and I'm either deeply disappointed and you're going, oh, well, this is really good. This is, up to my standard. And then we get this conflict that often happens, or, the assumptions or the belief that perhaps someone isn't up to scratch when it comes to their work, or they weren't paying attention, or they didn't put in their best effort, which, as you know, can be the spiral of conflict. And we're singing the same song here. I think, Gary, is communication is so underrated, but such an easy lever for leaders to pull if they want to be learning more about influence.
Sorry, when I was a teenager and I was having these arguments with my brother and so on, and I was just really interested in conflict and negotiation. I used to read heaps of stuff on it. Yeah. And I'd have these arguments, and I came to the conclusion, which I think is a fairly perhaps unusual thing for a teenager to do, but I realized that the person who was arguing against me or against someone else, even though I could kind of maybe show them how I thought they were wrong, or maybe I could argue in a way that somehow pulled their argument apart, I just remember the moment when I thought that person believes what they are saying as much as I believe what I'm saying. And I just went, wow, like I think they're wrong, but they are truly believing that. Yeah. And we're seeing that at the moment, of course, and it's never more obvious than in the US, where it's highly polarized about, vaccines and so on. Yeah. And people who say, it's more about my freedom than it is about my health, and etc. And I mean, America whilst we have a lot of similarities with America, they have a very different background in terms of their relationship going way back with England and fighting to have their freedom from England and so on. And I was always thinking, where's the difference? What is this idea about their freedom, and how come that? Why is that such a big thing to them? And it contradicts the idea of staying healthy. I have the freedom to not have a vaccine, for example. Yeah. And until I heard one guy say, and again, this is like you said, it's kind of that expectation of what a government is compared to our expectation. And he said you have to understand that I believe the government's job is to protect my rights, not to protect my health. Oh, and I went, yeah. Right. Whereas we look at the government and say, okay, we've got Medicare and so on, and the government will act to help us protect our health or our finances or whatever. And he said, no, it's purely to protect our constitutional rights. And I look after my own health. That's not your job. That's not the government's job. And so again, we're all speaking English. We're all kind of in the same ballpark in terms of concepts, but it's a completely different way of looking at the world.
Yeah. And even that conditioning from one continent to another, if you've grown up in the States and your conditioning is, this is our constitutional rights, this is what we stand for, versus an Australian background and what we grow up believing, and how we form our beliefs of what is the government for and what we need to adhere to can just have such a big impact on conflict and the way that communication plays part in that.
Yeah, and I think it's that phrase, and I think this, as you say, happens within organisation as well. But it's sometimes said that whether it's Australia and America or England and America, two countries divided by a common language.
Yes.
And that happens in the workplace, doesn't it? You know, common language, we're all on the same page. And if we're all on the same page and we've all agreed on it, why didn't this happen?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. If we're saying the same things, why are we getting different versions?
And I've been doing magic tricks for a long time, and now I find myself in the middle of tricky conversations because it's tricky. And,
yeah.
And it becomes tricky because not only are these beliefs in our brains, and it's possible to find out what those beliefs are, but what we both know causes the real issue is when those beliefs come out is the emotion behind it.
Yeah.
And in terms of the barrier for any leader, it's the emotion. Things go wrong when people get angry and upset with each other because all of a sudden their brain chemistry changes and they feel under threat in some way. Or their persona, their identity feels under threat, and we very quickly fight back against that. And I often use the analogy of people own a dog, and one thing about a dog is that a dog gives you unconditional love, right? So you've got a great relationship with a dog. They give you unconditional love. They hate it when you leave. They love you when you come back. They lick you all over. There is nothing more unconditional than the love of a dog. But have you ever tried to take a bone away from a dog while it's eating it? They will rip your arm off, right? So all of a sudden, the dog that loves you more than it loves itself will kill you if you try to take its food away from it.
Yes.
And I just think that's what happens with humans. You know, we all get on well, but you try to tell me that I can't have that. And all of a sudden, with the best will in the world, we all sort of kind of turn on each other.
Yep. Survival mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what do you think is your favorite magic trick?
Oh, I've got a magic trick, which is it's just known as the rubber band trick, and it's two rubber bands.
Yes.
And if I had any rubber bands, I could show you. But it's two rubber bands that are joined. You put them on your fingers and they are joined. And a moment later, they are not joined.
Oh.
And that's my favorite trick because of the reactions it gets from people. It's a very clever trick, sort of technically. Simple but clever, and it's got so much, you know, there are principles about how you do magic, and this particular trick has got a lot of these principles built into it, and it's a great, so if you're trying to teach someone about magic, like the principles of it, you show them this trick, they will learn a lot from it in terms of presentation, the psychology, the timing of it, all that kind of thing. Because most magic is, people always want to know how magic works, and this is exactly the same with communication. People want to know what is the mechanics of the trick, how does it work? And the mechanics is kind of 10%, whereas the psychology and the presentation is the other 90%.
Yeah.
And that's why when people find out how a trick works, they tend to go, well, that was simple.
Yeah.
Because all they're seeing is the mechanics of it, the actual mechanism of it. What they don't see is all the stuff around it that needed to be in place.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite one, because I can do that trick without actually looking at what I'm doing. And what I do is I watch the other person's face, because I just love the moment, because what happens is their eyes just get bigger, slightly bigger. And that is literally their eyes trying to get more light in. It's like, I don't believe it. I need to get more light. I need to see this again, right? And I just love that moment of that reaction on people's face.
Well, you'll have to show me next time we catch up.
I will.
All right, let's shift gears here a little bit. Your top 5 tips for leaders.
Yeah.
Hit me with it.
Top 5 tips on influence. The key thing about influence that I learned many years ago is that in order to influence someone, the best way to influence them is to get them to the point where they will let you influence them.
Ooh.
And that really means about building a relationship. So to influence someone, you have to get them to the point where they are willing to let you influence them. In other words, willing to let you talk to them, willing to consider what you've got to say. The second one is that sometimes influence is seen as trying to push people in a certain direction, be persuasive, influence them to your point of view. I actually think being influential is about, I call it unlocking possibility. So you
Mm.
might walk into a room, you have no agenda, you have no particular outcome you're looking for, but you are influential if you help that group of people to see what the possibilities are and create a good outcome. So it's not just about pushing in one direction, it's about unlocking possibilities. It's very much about relationships. And I think there are three levels of relationship that we need to focus on as leaders. We all know we need to build relationships, and we spend time building relationships. We talk about that a lot, but we also need to maintain and repair relationships. So we need to keep a focus on it, because as we all know, if you don't maintain and repair relationships, that's how divorce happens, right? So
Yes.
you know, your personal relationship, you go, what the hell happened then? You know, how come I'm divorced all of a sudden? I thought we had a relationship. Well, you did, but it fell apart and you didn't do anything about it. So that's number three. Number four is two key things in order to build a relationship. Two absolutely fundamental things are respect and a common goal. So respect for the other person, even if you don't agree with them. And it doesn't have to be a personal respect in a sense. You may not like the other person, but to have that level of professional respect for who they are and what they've got to say, and a common goal. And sometimes that common goal is very specific about we're trying to both achieve this end result, but sometimes the common goal is simply working out an outcome that is okay for both people.
Yep.
So the common goal is being able to work together.
Yep.
And the last one, number five, would be, as we have discussed, I think communication is often just, you know, whatever comes out of your mouth as you speak. But I think we need to do a little bit better than that. And so I would suggest to leaders to think about the question, what do you want to achieve with your communication today?
Yeah.
What do you want to achieve with it? Not just how do I get my job done, not how do I talk people into things, but you know, what we can achieve with our communication is basically three things. We can support other people, we can advance our own needs, and we can do what I mentioned before, which is to unlock possibility. And certainly in COVID times, if you're stuck at home with your family as well, how do you support the people around you? How do you advance your own needs so that you don't feel as though you're always giving to other people?
Yeah.
And how do you unlock the possibilities of what's happening in your family at the moment?
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. And I think we need to, you know, wake up every day and be thinking that and focusing on what it is that.
Yeah. What can I do with my communication today? What can I, rather than just reacting, what can I make happen? What can I help to happen? Yep.
Yeah. Brilliant. And you have got an additional resource for people if they are looking to up their influence. The 10 strategies to be more influential in any situation. I'll add the links into the show notes for today. But if you are listening and you've got a pen handy, it is gettalk, getalk.at/influen. INFLUEN. Jump in there, and Gary has very kindly offered to share his 10 strategies to be more influential in any situation. Thanks, Gary.
Ali, just quickly, when people click on that, it actually asks you to answer two questions, and the two questions are something like, did you enjoy hearing Gary today, and would you recommend him to someone else? So you just have to answer those questions to get past that, to get the resource. Feel free to say, no, I hated every minute of it and I'd never recommend him to anyone. You know, the questions are not there for me to get some praise. It's just the two questions that are part of the system. So just say whatever you want, and then you'll get the resource at the end of it.
I'm sure everyone has loved listening to how to be more influential. It's one of those key tools that we all need as leaders as well. So thank you, Gary, for being on the show today. It was awesome to chat with you.
Thanks for having me.